Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations. And for people who don't know about the format, what I do is every week or so, I invite on a new guest, someone whose work I find interesting or who I admire. And I ask questions, the guest questions for the first hour. And to be fair, and also to allow us to cover things which didn't get covered to the extent that they should have been, I allow the guest, the screens are turned and the guest then is able to ask me questions for an hour. And today's guest is Pamela Lindsay. Welcome to Rational Space Disputations, Pamela.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
And I met Pam a number of years ago. Actually, I remember the exact time and place, which was March 15th, 2019, because I was running the Rational Space Critical Thinking series at the time. And it was on Does Transactivism Negatively Impact Women's Rights with Megan Murphy and Julie Ray Goldstein. And Pam came up to me after the session and invited me to a dinner that she and Paul Viminitz put on. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I think it's called.
That's correct, yeah. After the film. Right?
Anyway, yeah. It's rather, I'm not sure if it's an honor or not, but it's about, controversial views. People with controversial views get invited to dinner. And then there's a number of people, there's about over 10 people there. And then you have these interesting discussions with people there. So Albert Howard and I went down to Lethbridge and we participated in that dinner. So that's how I got to know Pam, was from that dinner. And I've been very interested in the work Pam's doing. Pam was a graduate student, was a graduate student at the University of Lethbridge. So I'm very interested in her views on being a student. But as well, she's been doing quite a lot of very interesting work on equity, diversity, and inclusion policies in universities across the country. So anyway, so a lot of interesting things to talk about. Pam, before we start, perhaps you can just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're interested in, just so they can get a good sense of what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I left the university in, I believe, 2017. I completed all but defense of my master's thesis. Since then, I've been doing some independent research. I do research for Paul Viminitz as a research assistant. I've taken on some of my own initiatives, and I've put my academic studies on hold, but I'm revisiting completing my degree and moving on. So COVID kind of impacted my decisions, as well as, geographic considerations. I can't move to pursue my academic, further academic career, but COVID's actually opened up some more options, and as far as perhaps completing a lot online. So it might be a good time to revisit all of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
Excellent. So starting with your academic background.
Yes.
So your degree, you are pursuing a master's in philosophy?
In philosophy. My interest has been in belief maintenance and acquisition. So, okay. Yeah, so that was.
And so is that, are you doing a thesis on this?
I've written a thesis. Yeah, I have written a thesis.
And so what is your position or your arguments on? It's on belief acquisition.
And maintenance. And it's arguing that one of the important ways we come by our beliefs is through the doxastic labor, but doxastic just being a term which means belief. So it's not necessarily how we come to know something. It's just how we come to believe something. And it's quite banal, I thought, but apparently it rankles some people. And it's looking at the role of our nearest and dearest in the acquisition and maintenance of our beliefs. And it's not I think some people find that to mean that I just believe whatever people closest to me believe. It isn't the case. Our brains use an awful lot of glucose energy and time. We can't possibly know all there is to know. So we have people close to us with whom we engage in discussion, and you know, we trust, and we share that labor. Sometimes we're going to believe things such as, if I want to know who's a good mechanic, and I have somebody in my group who's mechanically inclined, then I'm going to probably believe that person when I'm given a reference to a good mechanic. Whereas I know who in my group I'm not going to ask a math question. So it's not a matter of just picking up our beliefs, but it is just looking at it. It's kind of an evolutionary account. Like I say, I think it's quite Bell. but it's taken, for example, I was, one of my thesis supervisors was quite interested in climate change. And I suppose because things like Fox News and whatnot say, well, they're warning about groupthink and how climate scientists aren't, I think it was, what's his name, Will. Anyway, he was said that we do, we're not just, we're not robots in lab coats, that we are affected by people around us, and so we can be susceptible to groupthink, but that's seen as undermining the climate consensus, and that's a right-wing position to take. So I was compared. I'm not a political person in that respect. Probably if you added up my beliefs, you'd say, okay, I'm probably a little more left-leaning, whatever that entails. It's just, it's just not the sorts of thing I'm interested in. Interested in how we come by our beliefs, the mechanisms, and one of, and so it's so I'm not trying to make a political statement, but it's really hard, I find, when you have people that have become, I would suppose, quite passionate about a belief that's embedded in a very politically polarized situation, in order for them, also being human, to extricate their, or if that's the right word, to pull themselves out of that context and just examine dispassionately the how we come by our beliefs.
That's fascinating, because I've noticed this a little bit myself, well, in a lot of things, but the vaccines is really where I find it's the most difficult, because I know people on both sides of the vaccine question, very, very strong proponents of one side or the other, people who I respect, I respect, and I've just kind of now, I've taken a position that I don't know, I just have no way of evaluating, and I don't have the time or the interest in, I'm not particularly interested in vaccines and looking, and it just seems to me to be too complex. The material is too complex for me to figure out. Anyway, I don't have a background in statistics or medical trials or anything like that, and neither do the people that I'm talking with. But they seem to think, some people, that they've gone into the peer-reviewed literature and they've read stuff, and I'm going, well, I don't quite know how you do that. So, but I notice the fear that you have a fear of just saying anything about it at all in front of different groups of people, because it's like, now I'm going to have to get into the my doubts about it. And I just, I'm not interested enough in it to pursue it. If I were interested, then I could pursue it more. So, and what comes to my mind is a little bit of the tribalism. Like, have you looked at that a bit, like the tribalistic kinds of things that go on with respect?
A little bit. I'm less interested in the broader tribalism. I know that's applied often to, say, if you look at US politics and whatnot, that it seemed to permeated our own discourse, Canadian discourse, so much. And it's, I mean, that can be a part of it, but they're not the people that we're having lunch, sitting in the lunchroom with. I'm interested in who we're sitting across the hall with, who we're engaging with, what sort of work are we doing together. And that was more, so it can be a little bit tribal. Now we can look and say, okay, if we're colleagues and we, friends and we hang around, we're talking a lot about batting ideas around. And I wouldn't be a good friend to you if I was a yes man and nodded and agreed with everything you
Yeah.
said. You'd probably question whether I'm disingenuous, it's just a little too good to be true. And so we do rely on people to keep us sharp as well. I might have friends, and I do have friends that hold positions I don't agree with. It might be maybe some people are quite you'd say conservative in the sense of maybe being more traditional than I am, and some of the things that I accept they might find a little too far flung, maybe a little too hippie or whatever you want to call it. That's fine. But we've got a lot of values, including being able to talk to each other openly and honestly, that helps get us into some good discourse, and we're able to hear each other. But there might be one belief, perhaps, if one of us is a raging homophobe or something, you're going to pull, that might be the belief on which I just can't hang around with you.
So and this might be a little bit too personal for you, but is there any, like, have there been instances where you just say, I can't interact with this person anymore because they hold this belief? Has that ever happened to you?
For myself, I can't think of a good example right offhand. I think where I back up is where there's too much, it's gone from away from a passionate discourse. I'm all open to my friends, and I, in my little you can get really excited and almost shout. So that if you're a little bit timid, we're just caught up in things. But, there's a point where it's just, I'm right fighting, and there's no argument. So it's just, you're wrong, I'm right. You just can't continue with the discussion. So I know I kind of avoid people who are prone to get into that position on particular issues. And so there might be something that's worth discussing with them, be it political or whatever belief they're holding. You just can't even get close to it because it's so fiercely.
Yeah.
So you might look for, you might find a strategy, look for a window, or look for something beside that belief that.
Yeah. Well, that seems though to be more the forum rather than the content. Like I was thinking more of the like I've had situations where someone just gets upset about things. Like I can't interact with people who get upset about, like, you get into an area that is like a, somewhat of a controversial area, and then I think I'm kind of sad because I think I'm gonna have to watch. I'm gonna have to censor myself when I'm around this person. Like I can't. Like, are you able to hear me still, Pam?
It says my internet.
Maybe you should just turn your screen off for a second if you can. Can you hear me, Pep? Oh. Welcome back.
Hi.
This is the first time this has happened. But then this is typical of the Zoom situation. So just getting back to what we were talking about, yes, which was, and I'm just going to try and get rid of Paul Viminitz here. there we go. Okay, excellent. So I was worried about fiddling with something in the fear that I might make things worse. So I was talking about my own situation, which is, I'm not sure if there's ever been any content kind of disagreement, but there's definitely been form where I just get sad because I think this is not really going to be a close relationship anymore, because I realize that this person is not going to be able to, if things start to get a bit contentious, they're going to get upset, and I can't really talk to them anymore. But in terms of content, like some of these very, very significant kind of hot button issues, has that ever happened with respect to you?
Yeah, so well, we'll take somebody who has more of a, say, a fundamentalist view. We go back to the homophobe example, where you know, God hates gays kind of talk, and just to really embed it in this, you know, religious, in the worst set of a word, not a theological discussion, not a, you know, there's no real intellectual engagement involved. It's just a beaking off and loud and embarrassing, and just something of which I just don't want to have anything to do with that person.
Yes. What about in the university context? So it's one thing, our personal kind of relationships with other people, which is just voluntary, and you know,
Sure.
people, you know, choose to spend their time with particular individuals. But in the university context, is there any content kinds of areas that should not really be discussed at the university, in your view?
I don't know. I don't think that there's, I think as far as is a discussion, I think everything should be on the table.
Yeah.
I've been accused of being a little bit too open that way, that I should have a position. And there's lots of times I haven't thought about something enough to have a position. I don't think it's unless I'm willing to hear something out. You know, maybe I don't want to, maybe it's something I don't want to take the time to hear out, and that's okay too. We can't listen to everything, but that somebody on campus shouldn't be having a discussion. It's just seems kind of contrary to
yeah, and it raises the question, how do you know whether they should not be allowed? Like, if you don't know what the view is, then how can one decide that they're not supposed to be expressing that view? Like it doesn't seem to me to be a viable kind of approach in the intellectual kind of domain, is to be making these kinds of decisions about things, which seems to be strange in the university context.
Now you might say, maybe I should have a discussion in a conference room or something. I'll give you an example. I was out in the smoking area with some colleagues, used to philosophy and used to discussing a lot of contentious issues, and quite dispassionately. So we were talking about pedophilia. Now my kids are grown, and I'm a student. I don't have grandkids, so I'm not in a position where perhaps I couldn't have had this discussion when my kids were little. I get that. And but we're continuing a discussion because some of us smoke, and it was just, we're standing together, and somebody, an outsider, who had been he'd taken some philosophy courses. I don't know that he really cottoned onto it, but he came up and chastised us because we were talking, you know, whether it's probably is pedophilia another sexual orientation or that sort of thing. And we're just having a discussion about it. And I was standing with male colleagues, and he chastised them. And then he turned to me and he said, "You're a woman and a mother. How could you engage in this discussion?" So we all kind of shrugged. Okay, well, maybe we should move over there. I don't know. So maybe there's some argument.
If you had someone who wanted to organize a talk on this subject, whether pedophilia, the question of whether pedophilia is another.
Actually, we did have we had a student do a defense of pedophilia. And that was very interesting.
So that happened at Lethbridge?
It did happen. He gave a talk on it. And one of his supervisors teaches feminist philosophy. She was ready to, you know, just nail him, but she agreed to be his supervisor. And in the end, she gave him, I think, an A+. because of his argument. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean the position that she endorsed, but he did provide a good argument. And it doesn't mean it's even a position he endorsed. He was doing an exercise in taboo busting.
Yeah, no. Like I'm amazed that happened. Like,
Yeah.
when was that? What year was that?
That would have been possibly 2018, somewhere around that neighborhood. I can look up the date. And
Well, you guys at Lethbridge you seem to be immune from the.
well, so in some ways.
Oh, Anthony Hall. So Anthony Hall was Lethbridge. And now, so you're quite familiar with Anthony Hall's case, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not really well versed in it, but I've been privy to his ordeal, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah.
And that was there was quite a lot of mobilizing. So maybe if you could just tell us, for our listeners who don't know who Anthony Hall is, perhaps explain that.
Yeah, Anthony Hall was accused of endorsing Holocaust denial, in which I sat with Paul Viminitz and we went through reams of Tony's videos and tapes and whatnot. Never had we found Tony deny the Holocaust. And that, what he's done since, it's not like I follow his discourse, and I'm not suggesting by any means that he has since. I'm just saying that because it's an ignorance gap on my part, I can't fill it in with what I don't know.
Yeah.
But beforehand, what he said is, I'm a historian and all history is open to revision.
Yeah.
So that's
why should the Holocaust be exempt from that?
Exactly. So
yeah. It should have the same standard applied as all other things.
Sure.
But there was like the 9/11, but he was allowed, no one got upset about the 9/11 stuff.
Not in any serious sense in the classroom. I don't believe so.
What I understand is that he thinks that 9/11 was something that was perpetrated by Mossad.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Yeah, so yes. That, I guess that's how all of that ties in together. So,
well, I think from what I understand the case, and I did follow it relatively closely from an academic freedom standpoint.
Sure.
Is he was identified Mossad as the orchestrator of 9/11, which probably got various Jewish organizations, Israeli supporting, upset about that. Yeah. And then and this is kind of what happens a bit in these contexts. Sure. He was kind of opened up for various kinds of surveillance by various groups that were trying to get him, like they were trying to catch him out. He was on a video, which I did see, which said, as you said, it wasn't denying the Holocaust. It was saying that the Holocaust is something that should be up for discussion, just like any other
historical event.
Yeah. However, I do think there was an actual Holocaust denier on the video as well, which, this is a guilt by association kind of mechanism. So you shouldn't be held to account for things that other people say that you have nothing to do with. And then from what I understand, someone posted something, was able to get into his Facebook account and posted some attack that was happening on a Hasidic Jewish person, which made it seem like he was endorsing violence against a member of a Jewish entity. And then, but he said, no, this isn't mine. I took, he was appalled by it, he whatever. So I don't quite understand why that stuck in any way, because, someone setting you up like that, and I find it hard to believe that he would do that. Yeah. So what was it that he was suspended for? Like, because the university stepped in and removed him.
Yes. I believe because he was making one or more faculty members feel unsafe, I believe. So I have, I have to revisit the conditions, and I'm sorry I don't have an answer ready.
But was it the video on the Holocaust saying they should be open for debate? Was it the Mossad thing, or was it this thing that was obviously planted on his Facebook?
I believe it was a combination of the cartoon planted on his Facebook and his assertion that all historical events are open for revision. You know, with new information. It doesn't mean they're all correct, but as a historian, that's your job.
Yeah, no, I don't, I find that to be bizarre,
Yeah.
but the Mossad one is a bit more, you know,
Mhm.
difficult, because I think that's highly unlikely to be true,
Mhm.
personally. However, I would never say someone should be fired. Like, I think some people would say people should be fired for that,
Mhm.
because that's they would say that's incompetent, saying that.
Yeah, I think that was part of the.
Like, I remember, because I did see an academic freedom discussion
Right.
at a guy, a union person from University of Lethbridge, who did just very briefly mention the Anthony Hall case.
Right.
And they were planning on having some kind of examination of his competence. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And I don't know. I don't know the findings. I think.
But they never got into it. They never actually had it happen. So he got bought out.
Yes.
Before but the guy from Lethbridge that I was listening to,
yes,
was sort of saying that was a pity that didn't happen, because then we could have gone through some of those processes of
sure.
you know, judging about competence and so on. I'm quite nervous about this competence kind of adjudication.
By which
because you can see how that could be abused. Like I know people get upset when they have all these kinds of somewhat dubious things being said by professors, but to have that kind of go on, your tenure be examined from this competence standpoint,
right?
The politicization of that the possibility of politicization is very real in that case.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, no, but that's a very interesting. I think the Anthony Hall case, I still am very fascinated by that, and it's a pity it didn't get, you know, that it kind of ended, and we didn't get to pursue some of those issues.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it was. I think a lot of people just tried to brush that away.
Yeah.
You know, oh no, we haven't had a violation of academic freedom here at University of Lethbridge. Push, you know. So
yeah.
Oh, it's Tony Hall. You know, they've you know, kind of. He's had his difficulties, perhaps, with, you know. I mean, but maybe personally, some people didn't like him or whatever. So he was, you know, they found him easy to dismiss, and that's just a shame. That's got nothing to do with his.
Yeah.
You know.
No, and universities don't really, like, it seems to me to be irresponsible for them to not, like, to try and just brush it away when these are fundamental kinds of things that we have to try to understand in more detail. But, you know, I think everyone just gets a bit afraid to kind of tackle some of the issues. Universities' reputation management is kind of getting involved. Other faculty members with their various petty, you know, kinds of attitudes.
Right.
And then the person themselves, this is very difficult. Like, they have to be up for the fight, which many people are not up for.
Sure.
Like many people don't want to spend the next, Denny, I'm not sure if you know about the case of Denis Rancourt.
Yes, I sure do. Yeah.
Anyway, Denis Rancourt has been fighting. He's been fighting since, I think, 2008.
Yeah, it's been a long haul.
And it's still not over yet.
No.
But I was talking to him, and he said, you have to basically embrace this new role and not see it as a burden that is, you want to get back to your actual, but make it your new kind of project that you're going to take on. That's kind of how you have to see it. And many people, professors, are not really prepared for that situation. So the dinners, Pam, I think our audience might be interested in this kind of thing that you do about the inviting people to dinner.
I was going to segue to the dinners because Denny Rancourt was one of the first people I'd wanted to have at our table. He's a friend of a friend, and
Yeah,
Denny's more than willing,
yeah.
but I'll explain why we won't take any funding to have people come to our dinners as well. So I believe it was in the summer of 2017, myself and Paul Viminitz were having a discussion, and I said, wouldn't it be interesting to have a venue? We seem to know so much about these reprehensible people that hold viewpoints that are found reprehensible as index to our left-leaning university milieu. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could actually just sit down and have a discussion, before we form a judgment? Why don't we just see if we can talk to people? At least to take a little bit of the vitriol out of the discussion in order to, take the vitriolic wind out of the sails of some people so you can talk to each other. So Paul Viminitz was on board with hosting these dinners. We went about the format. In this house, there's a table with 12 chairs. We figured that's a perfect place to put people seated around a round table. Small enough group that you can talk to each other, but you're not going to form any little side groups, really. You're actually going to engage in a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The format is cocktails at 5, dinner at 6, at 8 o'clock. We don't talk about the topic that the guest has been invited for until 8 o'clock when we turn the dishwasher on. And that gives people a chance to actually talk to each other, to humanize each other a bit. When you break bread together, it's really hard to be vitriolic. Now you actually get to know the person sitting beside you a little bit, right? And then you can launch into a discussion. And we've had, actually our first guest, we thought go big or go home, was a Holocaust denier, Monica Schaefer. And for, some who are familiar with her would, some have found it quite reprehensible that we would have her at our table. But she was a perfectly respectful guest. She said she believes in a right to peacefully express her opinion. There was nothing about her that was, you're trying to invite if she's thought vile by people, well, if you sit her down at the table, she's a perfectly, intelligent, respectful guest. She was just, and it was interesting. The people we invite, we don't want to vet people who come entirely. But we do want to say, can this person have a discussion? If you've got a known screamer, as we've talked about, or somebody who doesn't have a well thought out opinion or position or argument for their position, then it's you're not really having a conversation. So we do have to do a little bit of vetting. There are to be no cameras. There's no recording or any of that sort of thing. It's a private dinner party. We're told we could get grants. People were on board with, we could fund it, but Paul Viminitz and I provide all the food and that sort of thing, the venue. And it's just to keep people with, keep people's fingers out of the game and just let the discussion happen. You don't want to have stipulations on it. So it's from an outside influences. It's well, you can't have that person. You've got to adhere to these protocols. No, it's a dinner party, and we've invited anywhere from, I like inviting grad students, people who are just launching an academic career, or undergrads, because I think it's a good exercise in sitting down and having a civil discussion with somebody with an imposing viewpoint. We've had some professors, some wouldn't come to our table. It's just, oh no, it's nothing we want to get involved with. You were actually our first, each guest has been educated, but you were our first academic. So we've had young earth creationists who I believe you met, Mark. And he has a master's, I believe, in biochemistry. He's an educated man. He actually loved the dinner party. We had vigorous discussion. They had bullets at his feet, and he threw them back. But it was with one of our younger philosophers. They were having fun together. And so Mark left her home saying that's the most fun he'd had in 3 years. And there are people who think that if you sit down with people, say a Holocaust denier, you're going to legitimize their position, and maybe you're going to infect people around you with these beliefs. And that didn't happen at all. It's not like we had converts walking away from the table, but we had people with better understandings, at least in, it's we had a Catholic conservative pro-lifer, and now the pro-life demonstrations at the university are quite contentious. So as indexed to our left-leaning milieu, that's a pretty reprehensible position. Again, perfectly decent guest, decent person, a criminal lawyer who's very consistent in his pro-life stance, he's anti-capital punishment and the whole works. But what we discovered by sitting down with him is he's working through a position just as much as anybody, and it actually affected his views about pro-choice positions, because he realized it's not one position, it's actually a lot of people working through their own moral judgments on these matters. So, you do. So I shouldn't say you don't change your opinion. I just think if you think that by hosting a Holocaust denier, everybody in the room are going to walk out neo-Nazis, it's not going to happen, And it gave, what I was really struck by was, say when we had Monica come, our Holocaust denier, was she was surprised that people listened to her. And how do you ever work on your own beliefs? I mean, you can have this hypothetical adversary in your head where you're answering to objections and whatnot. You learn to do that, say in philosophy, that's an important one. You have to consider your objections and be ready to defend your argument, or revise your argument if you realize you can't get around those objections. So, by Monica's ostracized from her community in a pretty big way. She's Jasper. This is all public information, so it's and what she lost are people who would sit down, this way, well, we don't want to hear you, we don't want to hear you, we don't want to talk about this. So, if you don't have an opportunity to hear yourself, to play with ideas and whatnot, and some might say, well, she shouldn't have that opportunity, she just shouldn't think that. Well, she does,
Well, as well, presumably she has a network of Holocaust deniers.
She does.
So that's the other problem, is that people getting into these echo chambers whereby their beliefs actually become strengthened because they're now don't have anyone putting forth counter arguments. So it just becomes a much more, strongly held position than would be the case.
And where's she going to go? That's the other question. So I don't have a definitive answer on this. I don't know what, I'm just saying where, it's not surprising that the people who will listen to her would be endorsing the views more than challenging her on them, right? So it's a.
So what was her argument? Why does she deny the Holocaust?
Well, she doesn't deny that there were camps and that sort of thing. It's that we can't. She's saying that, well, if there were hospitals at the camp, why would it be a death camp if you had hospitals, and arguments like that. And so it's not that it's like a lot of things. It's not 100% rejection of all the empirical evidence you have in front of you. It's a different story that's attached to why each of these things exists. And it's so, well, and it seems, I mean, she was first became notorious for a video that she made with her brother called "Sorry Mom, I Was Wrong About the Holocaust," where it was an act of contrition for her mother, to her mother, who's now deceased, because she said, look, I was 16 and I confronted my mother and said, how could you, her German mother, how could you be complicit in the Holocaust? And she said, I don't know. And so all these years later, she said, now I know why she didn't know. It didn't happen. And that's the move she made. But it's pretty interesting. And I don't think it's uncommon for, like, I believe her dad was a Nazi officer. He spent time in prisoner of war prison. And it's pretty complicated when you start looking at children not only Holocaust survivors, but children of Nazis and whatnot. There's a good article in the BBC where there's a brother and sister who had themselves sterilized because they didn't want their father's genes being passed on another generation. There are other people who become very loyal to a parent. I believe as Monica's brother did with their father, and you know, and even her their own family is divided on Monica's brother is a denier as well, but he was, you know, when you become loyal to these parents who've loved you throughout the years, these things get a little more complicated. So
yes,
I'm
there's like Finkelstein, Norman Finkelstein, the case of Norman Finkelstein,
yeah,
which is like, this is where it starts to get really, you know, difficult, because like there's a kind of a spectrum of positions on it as well. One of them being that there's been exaggeration of the whole numbers and everything, right? Which is, and his view, Finkelstein. Now he's still very much the Holocaust was one of the worst atrocities ever that ever happened. Like he's not trying to minimize the whole thing, but he's saying that there's been a kind of a spinning of it to basically rent seek, to be involved in the rent seeking process to obtain financial compensation and to be used against the Palestinian, like the argument that the Holocaust is often used as a weapon against Palestinians who are seeking justice in the Middle East, you know, this sort of thing. And then he got slammed with kind of the Holocaust denial kind of thing, when I don't think that's a fair way to portray Finkelstein. Like, you know, because of some, you know, Zionist organizations are using the Holocaust for various purposes, that's not to deny the terrible kind of atrocities and everything that happened in the, you know, it's just, you know, it's the same with, you know, indigenous kinds of discussions about the history of indigenous peoples. We got 20 minutes left, Pam, or maybe a little bit more, because you got cut off a little bit with the technical difficulties. Your EDI, your work on equity, diversity, and inclusion policies.
Right. Yeah. So I was
doing there.
That was what I did with COVID lockdown quite a bit, and it's quite a monster. So I'll try to summarize as best I can, because I do think so. The EDI in at least the Dimensions project in Canada under the Dimensions Charter was implemented in 2019, and it's become part of the Canadian Research Chair. It's under NSERC. It's a National Science and Engineering Research Council, along with the SSHRC, the Social Science and Humanities, and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. So in a nutshell, EDI is embedded in a research excellence framework, and the research excellence framework is something that's been developing since about the 50s. Right now it's on kind of a global scale. So it's a competition for grant funding. And for people and resources, it's kind of an economic competition. So in 2013, the Harper government adopted the research excellence framework that's been being developed on a global scale, 2007 in the European Union, for example. And so they're trying to, it's a brain drain. You're trying to attract researchers from other countries to come to your institutions. So the research excellence framework gives you some merit criteria, and you try to outcompete your other institutions for funding. So you have your Canadian research chairs, which is you're a researcher recognized on a global scale. You get, your institution gets $200,000 a year over a 7-year period renewable once, and the tier 1. Tier 2 would be somebody who's just emerging as a global player and gets 100,000 a year. And then the bigger players are the research excellence chairs, which is a newer position, and then you're getting into the $8 million for your institution over a particular period, or as low as $4 million. So they are competitions, and the EDI has been promoted at equity, diversity, and inclusion as a central component of research excellence. So it's kind of an affirmative action hiring process embedded in a brain drain exercise. So for lack of a better word, brain drain program. So you're and it's really become, as you know, quite a monster, because there's this overarching body that's implementing the EDI program. It is also based on a human rights complaint from, I think, 2007, which like I say, it's quite a monster. So, it will take me years more to actually sort all of this out. I don't know how many people are actually doing a meta-analysis and trying to trace all the map out all the components of this index. But so it's also, EDI is also adopted on a global scale, say from Ireland, from the UK, from Australia. There's something called SAGE and something C. It's anyway, it's all on the EDI site. You can go to the Dimensions program online and have a look at it. The charter is there. They're using language like intersectionality, and they're really promoting the idea that diversity leads to research excellence and inclusion. So
yes. Okay, so it's some kind of federal program that is trying to institute this on all the grant kind of allocations on grants.
Correct. Yeah.
And I'm very fascinated in this. Well, as you know, this is a major interest that I have as well. I've been very appreciative of your work that you're doing on this, because I think there needs to be more kind of systematic kinds of examinations of this. But I'm just like, I never get very far down the rabbit hole on this file. And I'm just wondering if you found, because it's often very evasive as to what is being talked about. So research excellence, the argument is that excellence in research will be enhanced through these measures.
It's a capacity building. So capacity building, I was trying to look for a definition. Yeah. So more better, kind of a Zoolander argument, more better research and more for us here. And it's so I'm just kind of trying to get their argument down pat here on this.
Why do they think that research excellence is going to be enhanced through these kinds of processes?
Creativity and innovation are some of their claims. And you have to overcome barriers that prevent people, say, from disadvantaged groups. So if you go right to the core of EDI, you will find an Excel sheet with a quota system. Yeah. And it'll just give you numbers. And that's the bottom line of all of it. But then it's just seeded with all of these other arguments. Well, you've in many contradictory, for example, on NSERC, there's purportedly a research paper that supports diversity and how it makes research better. And one of them, you'll find that people who have more gender diversity and ethnic diversity and whatnot on papers get cited more. And yet on the Canadian Research Chair bias and peer review training module that people are being encouraged to take, it's just you can look it up and take your little quiz online. One of the biases that you're supposed to be aware of is not evaluating work on the number of citations they have. So I don't think there's anybody, I think there's a whole bunch of committees and people are not really looking for contradictions. They're not looking, as far as I can see, for disconfirming evidence. You know, you need to be putting together, first of all, going to primary sources, and then considering the objections and taking them. But if you object to these sorts of things, you're almost a moral monster. Particularly, I really want to bring up the role of implicit bias in the middle of all the EDI and the overstatement, at the very least, of what implicit bias is or does or can tell us and how it can be changed. But if you look at NSERC training models and a lot of the basis of the EDI program, and moving a barrier to inclusion and diversity is addressing implicit biases. Well, what are we measuring? What proof do we have? Well, virtually nil that we're actually, you know, any of the interventions we have for putting through people through implicit bias training, making them aware of the biases. At the very least, it does nothing, and at the worst, you even get a backfire effect. You know, it's just there. It's a that one's a real bugaboo for me. And you'll find on any EDI site of a Canadian university, you will find a recommendation that you take the Harvard Implicit Bias Association test. So what it does is measure the speed with which you've got these words pop up on a screen, and it says, how many times would you say you put black with bad? You know, and it's supposed to tell you at the end of it. But the Harvard Implicit Association test is not making this claim, but the universities are saying, well, you need to see if you have a bias. Go take this test. And lo and behold, look at me. This is horrible. I have a bias. You know, oh dear. But you can't just do a one-off on the test. And the people who've created the test don't make those claims. Actually, what people don't read are the ethical considerations on the test. And people at the diversity sites should not be putting this test up and saying, going to take it. It says the potential for use beyond the scientific laboratory. There's potential for use beyond the scientific laboratory. However, in the absence of relevant scientific expertise, because this is research, there is potential for misuse. We do not advise its use outside the safeguards of a research institution. What kind of safeguards are coming from an EDI office? You know, okay,
so there seems to be a few things there. One is the quota system. So it seems a little bit like possible that this is all just an elaborate justification for quotas.
Correct.
Possibility. I don't know enough about it, but I'm just, because I have seen this kind of, it's like the tail wagging the dog here a little bit, is that we've got it into, there's a very strong pressure. There's very strong pressure to have these kinds of proportional representation kinds of things happen. And if you see, for example, I've seen this happen at my own university where people were saying that we didn't have any Black administrators, and this was indication of some kind of, you know, possible bias that existed, right? But we didn't, that was just an assumption. That wasn't shown. And as you said, disconfirmation, you could think up other possible reasons why this might not be the case.
Sure.
Which would have to be explored as other possibilities, like, why is this the case? Here's a number of possibilities, and then going through and looking at each of them in turn to see whether that was the actual, but it would just be immediate, no, it's obvious some kind of bias that is operating here, which has resulted in this disparity, or what perceived disparity which exists there. So it seems like that is a possible thing. The other thing I've heard about with respect to the implicit bias, besides the ethical thing, which I'm very interested in that, because you could do some damage to people by making them think that they're biased when they're actually not, is there's evidently a difference between how one does on this test
Mhm.
and your actual actions
Correct.
in real life. Like you might score very badly on the test in terms of your so-called implicit bias, but then when you actually go to operate in an actual decision-making type of mode, you act differently than what has been kind of mapped in terms of this implicit bias stuff.
Because there's all sorts of things going on in what we'll call these black boxes, right, in our brain. So it might be the case. Maybe I've no doubt there's all sorts of biases. Biases aren't always bad. They help us get around in the world.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's the best thing we have to go on. I'm going to start here, and then when I have disconfirming evidence, that bias is going to change by that interaction or evidence. But we also have, say, the protocols of manners and how you treat people and other things that are floating around in there. So it might be the case that, maybe I was robbed by somebody at gunpoint who seemed to have brown skin. Now it would be wouldn't it be weird if I didn't have some sort of little adrenaline rush when something reminded me of, I'd see a flash of brown skin, and I correct myself and go, oh, that was that was this incident. It isn't at all people with brown skin, or but I might ask, I might reflect on that. But I've also got these other things going on that maybe I was my mother beat it into me that I treat all people with kindness, or so it's not there's all sorts. How these things interact in here is not something you can just have somebody who took a diversity workshop who's going to go out and now give you a quickie overview and correct your implicit biases, and Bob's your uncle, we're done here. And even if you can, even where there have been, I've looked at a study where there's some measurements that have indicated, say, a temporary change according to the test of what we're measuring. I don't know precisely in which object we're measuring in there precisely. I don't know. And they said, well, it seems to have changed, but the change doesn't seem to last. So, maybe because it's salient, maybe I was just thinking about that. So now I'm consciously affecting my answers to a particular test. And it might, because I was just thinking about how this workshop told me that having this sort of thing is an indication of bias. So
and so just going back to the claim. So this is the claim that diversity, the more diversity that you have, which I assume is these identity categories. So it's not, you're going to be a better biology department if you get a whole bunch of creationists and evolution all together, because with the diversity of ideas. So that's not what's being talked about.
That's not what they're talking about.
What they're talking about is according to human rights kind of categories. The more from those categories that you have, the better the research excellence that is going to occur. And the argument seems to be it's because these diversity categories or these identity categories, the presence of them brings about more creativity and innovative kinds of kind of aspects within an organization.
Right.
Is that the argument that they're putting?
Seems to be the argument. Yes. So if I have one of the examples that comes up with the crash test dummies, this is held up as one of the big standards for just say gender diversity. Well, because the crash test dummies were based on a man, and because there was a woman on the team, she said, hey, you should be making crash test dummies the size of women and children. Now, whether you required a woman to make that observation or not, I don't know that I don't think it's necessarily true that you do. Maybe it's a good thing, because if you have somebody who's, bringing in that sort of an insight in that situation, that might be well worth it. But it doesn't, and I don't. There seems to be an argument also that you having homophily, having homogenous teams lead to less research excellence. And I'm going, well, how does that work? It's
Yeah.
let's look at the Manhattan Project and
Yeah.
Daniel
Yeah,
Kahneman.
it sort of depends a little bit too, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a guy that I know, his name is Pat.
Mhm.
Anyway, he's a chemist, I think. Anyway, he's quite well known now because he got into a big, tussle with McGill. He's at McGill,
Yeah.
and he does something about lasers and light and things like this.
Mhm.
Anyway, he has to put on his application,
Yes.
some kind of diversity statement, whatever. And so like, it's like, well, how is like you're getting a number of people who are Black or Indigenous or
Mhm.
gay or like all these kinds of things.
Mhm.
How like the argument is that the more people that you have like that on your team,
Yeah.
they're going to be able to figure out this laser stuff with respect to light and
Right.
lasers and everything.
Yeah.
And how would sexual orientation,
Right.
bring about creativity and innovation in lasers? And so like, and wouldn't you really need to have people being quite similar often, because they'd be going through the same training process and so on that would be happening. Like there's we and people said to me as well that commonality, like commonality in teams is important as well,
Of
so that
course.
you can trust one another and all these kinds of things. And if you have people who are from very, very different kinds of backgrounds,
Yes.
potentially, how are you then going to have the kind of, perhaps bonding that might be needed to have the trust to work together long hours to be able to do things and so on?
Well, it's what I was looking at some of the studies about diversity, and a lot of them really, pump, oh yeah, diversity is it's a lot of air about creativity and innovation. But there's also been studies that have said just what you said, common shared values is where people work best together. And that seems to make more sense. It doesn't, like you say, the collegiality is it really underpins our epistemic practices. So our ability to work together on scholarly or research projects and whatnot. And so at least at the very least that we give uptake to process of that we're both members of the scholarly community, and that, at the but if you're going to spend long hours in the lab and whatnot, well, think of what diversity can do. Humor, which we'll get to in our comment section, it can be quite a contentious issue. So if I'm telling a joke that I feel like I have to stifle myself, because I'm now in this group, I think that having a diverse group might be a little bit stifling. And some would say, well, if you're going to make an off-color joke, you shouldn't be there. But the thing is, if you get close to people, you can make off-color jokes with each other. You can make, I've heard, Paul Viminitz in a joking with because he's Jewish and he's joking with a friend who's a lesbian, and they called each other the kike and the dyke. And Steve overheard that and just went,
oh no.
So, it's just
sounds like diversity training is in order.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Good luck.
And as well, another interesting case is like depends on what you're talking about. The military is a good example of this.
Sure.
So you think about, okay, what do you need to make the best possible military that you can ever have? So the strongest, solidest fighting force that you can put together.
Yeah.
And now you say, oh, well, it's got to embrace this diversity though. Like having this diversity is going to make it a better military kind of thing. When, I find that hard to, I think having women in the military is a big difficulty. And I don't think it's any accident that we're seeing all these, problems of toxicity and, sexual harassment, whatever, like that's the nature of military training, was sort of like you're a male, it's a very strong male kind of domain. And it's the same with nurses. Like, is it really good to get a whole bunch of really macho people
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
is that going to make a better nursing kind of environment? Like, it seems to be fighting against some of the essential characteristics that are needed for this kind of excellence, this kind of idea of excellence. And I'm worried a little bit about the, you know,
yeah.
that it's not really a well tested kind of bunch of precepts in all of this.
And the testing is morally reprehensible, is I think where we've gotten to, just to, you know, because this is clearly good.
Yes.
And so, you know, in order to bring up, question it, well, you're whatever index to a particular milieu, at least you know, you must be a right-wing extremist, or you're, you know, if you're, you know, if they, you know, you're on the evil or crazy or gullible spectrums, because they have to come up with different, if you're being cooperative and you're nice, well, then you must be, you know, under the spell, your intellect must be down, that you're under the spell of some sort of ideology, and you can't think for yourself. And, you know, so there's all sorts of moves that you have to make to explain why somebody would question a particular hypothesis. And, you know, when we're in a university, that's just, I think the business we're in is testing hypothesis, putting forward and testing hypothesis. And also, you know, under the auspices of academic freedom, being able to criticize policy and whatnot. How are you supposed to do your job? And what is the big, you know, what's the big threat? And if there is a threat, well, where's your argument? And you know, let's talk this through. But saying let's talk this through is just a reprehensible move when you're, you know, so clearly, this is so clearly the good and right thing, that if you even say there's nothing to talk through here.
It's already decided.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of dissemination to everyone to be able to accept. So Pam,
Yeah.
an hour, we've reached the hour point.
Yeah.
So I think that we've gone through quite a few areas, and we can continue as well with them if you like, or we can enter into new areas. So at this point, I'll turn the controls over to you, and you can ask me whatever questions you like for the next hour.
Well, and if I'm crossing any lines with, I don't think I am, with arbitration and that sort of thing.
No.
I just don't. Yeah, you'll just. But I'm. Yeah, and I think what it will probably do is continue our discussion. I'm realizing that I've got to set up my own separate blog that's all and only perhaps for EDI issues and you know, and formats and whatnot. So because I'm just, it's so overwhelming. I just go, there's so much here.
I know, and it's hard to kind of get it into an understandable way because of all the details that exist.
But so what I wanted to ask you, and it's from a student perspective, I wondered if you've examined your good old reliable rate my professors comment, because I found it very, very interesting to look back over the how the rate my professors comments have changed on your profile. And early on, I mean, I don't think it's a requirement for university professors to be nice and sweet, but there are a lot of those comments about you, including the sweetest prof I've ever had was said about you in 2013. Nice, approachable, open. The worst case scenario, some people found you severe markers, other people came to your defense and said, hey, you know, like show up, attend class. A lot of people that are complaining is the same old saw, come to class and you'll actually do well. And that, you know, policy, the topic can be a little dry, but I've also seen comments that you've had, you know, it depends on your interests when you go into a class too, right? Some people are riveted and get your nerds, and other people are going to say, I can't get into this topic, but, you know, but it's also mentioned that you have a sense of humor and that you're very accessible, and there is nothing about political ideologies or anything. And then you get to about 2019, right? And you have a few really positive comments, such as your breath of fresh air in this era of stifled expression. Universities are intended to be places of inquiry and debate, and Widdowson embodies that, you know, that sort of
Yeah.
Let's see. So, and you're professional in that she did not espouse her political beliefs in lectures. I don't know why that's, but that's a criteria that they met. But in from the 2020 calendar year, you get comments such as this: "This prof was an absolutely horrendous professor. Her unnecessary, aberrant viewpoints exhibit her chauvinistic, sectarian, doctrinaire mindset, making the class unbearable and unachievable and also terrifying." And I really want to know if you had any students leave class in terror. I mean, if I was terrified of, how does a view become terrifying? So it's just yeah, her personal views regarding race and religion are concerning. Now it's a really, yeah, so so we've really moved from, a lot of the earlier comments were about what class expectations are, readings, attendance, and that sort of thing. And now we've moved into this territory in about 2020 where they're starting to talk about,
Yeah.
respond to whatever is in the air regarding the controversies. And I laughingly made a note here because they're in the, I'll call it the, what we refer to as the wokeism and whatnot.
Yeah.
There seems to be a phrase, it's also in a sample diversity statement, where you're supposed to say in your diversity statement things like, if I'm comfortable, I'm not learning, or if I'm uncomfortable, I'm learning something. So
Yeah.
wouldn't terrifying be a really good thing? If I find your views so reprehensible, wouldn't I be uncomfortable, and wouldn't I be learning something by that logic? So there's really a lot of, I mean, it's just a silly example. Well, it's not really a silly example, because that's where, these are not really well thought out positions. They're just, you've dedicated your research, I didn't know this is all your research, on residential schools in an attempt to show how beneficial they were in correcting the savage nature of Indigenous Canadians. So I didn't know you were a one-trick pony, or, I bet you didn't know that that's where you're, so it's so and a terrible professor, and what has happened is proof of that. And that was from June 1st, 2022. So I think it was after.
There you go. Yeah. So it's still happening. So yeah, this is very kind of depressing. But it's kind of but it's a good indication of sort of what happened. And the ratemyprofessor.com whole thing is kind of, I think that's an indication of problems. Like I know that there's like not even my case, but just the general kind of customer is always right kind of mentality, which is difficult, because it makes you perhaps not even be it encourages you not to be a professional by this kind of popularity kind of thing that goes on. And there were, for example, there was like the Students Association president.
Yes.
Who's no longer the Students Association president. She was there, I can't remember the years, but it was like 2017 or so. Her name is Shifra Gadamzedi, who was is a very woke individual, one of the most activist oriented Students Association presidents that's existed. Yeah. And she was kind of angry at me for a number of different things. And at some point, I don't remember exactly what, it must have been, Islam was a big area, which had nothing to do with the teaching. I should stress this, is that for my entire academic career, I've avoided talking about my positions on things. I stay away from it, because I knew this was going to be a difficult area to bring that in. And so what I would always do is bring in views that other people held, a variety of them, like a bunch of different. So for example, on the Islam question, there was a TVO episode, which is TV Ontario, with Steve Paikin, which had it was just after the Charlie Hebdo assassinations in France, and Steve Paikin did a kind of an interview with there's six different people, and they had a variety of different views. There's Jonathan Kay and Margaret Wente, who were the sort of liberal position, and then there was a feminist. I think her name was Susan Cole, who was opposed to free speech,
Right.
and was actually thought pornography was violent towards women, and then there was a Islamic woman with a hijab on, who was kind of concerned about the impact this would have for Islamic people, so on. So I showed this program, and I started doing that right after the Charlie Hebdo assassinations, and it was interesting to watch how the reception to that changed over the period of 5 years. But I would never have put forward my own views on the question at all. I would bring in different kinds of aspects. But anyway, Shifra Gadamzadi was instructing people on social media to go to my ratemyprofessor.com page and put in their anger towards me on that page. That's what she was instructing people to do because of my social media activities. And the thing that got people very, very angry,
Yes.
well, there's a lot of things that did, but one of the things that did was when I turned my Twitter account into the satirical character Francis McGrath,
Yes.
which was modeled on Andrew Doyle's satirical character Titania McGrath. Andrew Doyle had this tweet and he's pretending to be Titania, with Titania in some lingerie holding a sign saying "sluts for Islam."
Oh,
with a niqab on,
Right.
and saying, "Please come and join me for my slut walk against Islamophobia." So that was Andrew Doyle's tweet.
Yeah.
Anyway, I retweeted that myself as Francis McGrath, saying, once again, I'm posing as Titania's sister-in-law. Titania's leading the way. If you're going to be a true feminist, you have to accept Islam, the Islamic beliefs, Islamicism. ISIS is one of the most oppressed identities on earth. Some have even been jailed for their beliefs.
Yeah.
So I've got a commentary like that about this. Anyway, it was trying to draw attention to the contradictions that exist between being a feminist who values female equality. And I wasn't even talking about Islam, I was talking about Islamicism,
Right.
which is the dogmatic belief in all the tenets of the Quran. So I wasn't even getting into the question of whether Islam itself or Islam, but anyway. So this incensed Shifra Gadamzadi and all of the other her associates. And so she was stating that people should go to all my various ways in which they could express their discontent about me. And this is kind of the thing that was happening, is that people wanted to somehow create an environment which was going to make it impossible for me to exist as a professor at Mount Royal because of my social media activities, which I thought at the time that this had nothing to do with me being a professor at Mount Royal. This had to do with me being a private citizen and trying to draw attention to some of the problems that I was seeing with woke types of viewpoints, which is identity politics, which has become totalitarian. I would never, ever do anything like that at work,
Right.
or in the classroom or anything like that. But this was seen as a convenient way to kind of go after me. So this was happening. And interestingly, things started to go awry on the course evaluations in 2019 with the trans activism, that does trans activism negatively impact women's rights event. event that happened, because I had a trans student in my class who felt that this was very insulting to trans people and very oppressive to trans people. And this led this student to make really negative comments on my course evaluations. And that student was being encouraged to believe this by two professors at Mount Royal University. So there was a kind of a mobilization of the students, which was starting to happen in 2019. And this led me to notify the administration that this was happening and that my workplace was becoming poisoned by these professors who were objecting to the discussion of trans activism happening. So, but it was really kind of an accelerating kind of thing that was happening starting in 2019.
Yeah, which is, I don't know if it's coincidence or if it's all part and parcel, but it's around 2019 we had the Dimensions project launched. I mentioned implicit bias within the Dimensions project, but there's also the systemic barriers, which include the big emphasis on decolonization and indigenization and whatnot as well. So, you know, I think you were just probably getting nailed by a whole lot of I think an atmosphere that
yeah. And you see it and that's why I think my case is so important, is because I did involve myself in documenting the changes that were happening. So I've been in the university system starting in, I guess I started teaching in 2005. So I've been witnessing for almost 20 years now what has been happening. And I had actually some interesting things occur where I would give a guest lecture in one of my colleagues' policy courses. And I noticed a very, very significant shift start to happen in how my presence was received in that lecture. And I think it was about, 2018, 2019, where, it went from being sort of very, very interested and happy to have my views being expressed to one where people saw this as being offensive and so on. And so it's right about 2018, 2019, 2020. This is the shift that is happening within the student population. So there's obviously something going on in the school system that is bringing students into the universities. And then of course the emboldening the professors.
Yeah.
The last event that we were able to sit together, identity politics proponents and people who were arguing for the objective academic kind of approach, was, I believe it was in 2018, and I remember the event very clearly, and it's on the on the internet. I like posting it again once in a while, because we had 5 people with very different positions that were on the panel, and we all got along fine. We realized we had very different views, but no one denied the right of anyone else to be there. And then about 6 months later, those same one person in particular saying, how come I'm getting funding for events and what's going on with this? When I was sort of going, well, you were you're invited. Like there's no, why are you saying me getting funding for events is a problem? Like I get funding for events and I invite people like you and whatever. I'm not trying to exclude everyone, but I started in the fall of 2018. That's when it was no longer possible to sit at the same bench, sit at the same table with people with different positions.
Huge loss.
Yeah, no, it's terrible.
Actually, we invited at our dinner party, we wanted a rampant social justice warrior. So we invited one of your adversaries. Paul actually sent the invitation. So I'm paraphrasing the response, and that's that I won't sit at a table under a venue that gives, legitimizes positions like, positions like yours and whatnot. And yeah, and she was actually even seemed surprised that she would be considered, to have reprehensible views or whatever. So it's got, I think once again, it's indexed to particular social milieu. Maybe in her environment, she's used to being considered, and really probably believes what I'm doing is good and right, and is motivated by that. But there is a broader consensus on what you might call senseless social justice activism, or has it gone too far? There are things to talk about. Not everybody's on board with social justice warriors, and I think she's quite proud of that.
Oh yeah, well that's the whole. They're completely convinced,
yeah,
or at least that's the maybe they have doubts. Like it's funny because I have doubts myself all the time, and I try not to be dogmatic, but what I get from my adversaries is complete and utter certainty about their situation, and that really it was the best thing that ever happened that I was fired from Mount Royal, like that, and if I were them, I'd be a bit worried about it, because my social media activities are not seen as being acceptable. And if we're going to start having that as the way of looking at things, I'm sure there's going to be people who are going to have problems with their social media activities.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's not going to be long till there's going to be people who are going to be caught in the crossfire of all this.
Absolutely. And I wonder if there isn't, I don't know if this is an apt analogy, but it used to be the case that a school marm couldn't date or have relationships outside of her classroom. So we seem to have a modern day version of how you ought to, the decorum apart from your professional roles, right? Because, so what is it? You can't drink now, or, are we going to, where are we going to draw the line about the sorts of things you can and cannot do with your own?
And it's not even like it's totally unknown. Like that's the other kind of, despite, I went through 5 investigations on different
That's not my, sorry, I didn't know that one was on.
And each investigation had a different standard for this. So this is why I think the arbitration process is going to be very, very important, is because we can sort of see how the university is acting in a completely arbitrary fashion, basically just using their policies to get rid of people that they find that they for their reputation. They're trying to engage in reputation management, and anyone who they feel is threatening to their reputation, they're going to try to take out through these processes. And you don't know, it's all subjective. Like you don't know what is it that they think is good for their reputation or not. There's all these really, really difficult issues, and no one, this is an impossible situation to occur in a university setting, and it's going to mean most people are just not going to say anything, because they're going to be afraid to say just the most slightly critical thing, because that could then be labeled as being something. And that's what Mount Royal specifically said in my termination, that an investigator had found that I had harmed the reputation of Mount Royal University. It's like, well, get in line. Like how many people, I don't know, like I'm sure there's several people who are believed to have harmed Mount Royal's reputation. Like it doesn't, that's not a way in which we can govern a university.
Well, and a reputation is, it's evaluated by a valuer. So to whom are they whom is evaluating this reputation? Who are they beholden to?
Hmm.
Which stakeholders, which, are involved in, why do you care? Reputations don't just float around in the air. I mean, you've got to have a mark and say, this is who I'm signaling to and what I'm signaling.
Yeah.
And to what end. So you've harmed my reputation. It's just,
Yeah.
okay.
I know. And again, none of this is, it's not specified as to what they're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that just allows it to be, if they feel this is the case, then they're just going to get rid of you. So that's, it's completely outrageous. And they're going to be held to account for this. Like, this is just amazing that this has happened. I really thought, up until about a month before I got fired, that they would not do that. Like, that would be crazy for them to do that. But they seem to be, I don't know. Well, we'll find out, I guess, a bit more in January as to what the thought process was on all of it. But it just, I really have a hard time trying to figure out what's driving their whole approach.
Yeah, it's, I was looking at precursors to that sort of thing, and the zero, for example, the zero tolerance for violence in schools. So, what we're seeing now didn't just come out of thin air. There's been, there's been some building up of these sorts of things. So my oldest son, who gave me permission to use the example, went through the junior high school bullying in a pretty bad way. And he'd go and ask for help, and he was given a paper. And so were the purported bullies, who'd say, fill out little forms and say, how did you feel? And there were these paper trails, until one day he was caught in a circle of about 15 kids who all pushed him around, broke his glasses and that sort of thing. And he swung a punch in his defense. Well, there's a zero violence, right? So you're sent home. And I know this sounds like, this is a simplistic case, but there's also, I think, at least from what I glean from looking at your case too, you've taken the venues that are open to handling these things in a professional way and whatnot. And at what point is it unreasonable for you to say all of these are ineffectual and I've got to swing, such as perhaps your satirical approach? I mean, what do you have left when you've got pieces of paper and it's what are you supposed to be able to put up with, not only as I don't know if that's the right phrasing, but as a, profession, trying to be do your job in a scholarly community, and what are you supposed to, how are you supposed to respond to?
Yeah. And I was sort of, I was experimenting. It's interesting looking back on everything that occurred, because at the time I didn't have complete information. I had much less. I still don't have complete information. I had much less information then. I was just operating, reacting to everything that was happening. And I was really opposed always to punishing people, and I still am. I think things could have, I saw nothing, although I didn't enjoy, being smeared as a racist and an anti-Indigenous person and a hate monger, which had happened for about 4 years. So that had been going on for 4 years. But to protect myself, I was sending off notices to administrators, just telling them that my work environment was getting poisoned. Things like the evaluations that I got in 2019, which I could draw a direct linkage between those evaluations about how I was saying, they'd taken the things that were occurring in the trans activism discussion, which I'd never even said anything myself
Right.
about trans activism. It was Megan Murphy who was saying
Yeah.
things about trans activism. But this somehow got morphed into that I was saying degrading things about trans students in class. Like,
Right.
and what had happened was that some professors were saying just by the fact that I had organized this debate,
Mm-hmm.
this was an indication of how I had these negative views about trans students. And then this got absorbed by the students who then put this on the evaluations. So I notified the administration about this, and that it was rooted in the behavior of this woke element that was intolerant to any kind of questioning of their position. But I always said, I don't want anyone to be punished for this. Like, I don't think punishment is the right way to go about this, because then that doesn't allow the disagreements to be examined and to be understood and to be kind of transformed. But then I got investigated for my social media activities and found to have engaged in harassment for satirizing these attempts to get me fired. So people are trying to get me fired, and I was satirizing these attempts to get me fired. And then I was found to be a person who engaged in harassment. And that led me to go out to file complaints against a number of other colleagues who had been defaming me on social media for 4 years. But I didn't want to do that at all.
Yeah.
I was forced into doing it because I was having this being applied to my own, and now to make some kind of fair situation, then we were all going to have to be held to the same kind of standard that was going on. And then that was one of the reasons why they fired me, was that they had to spend all this money on investigating all these complaints, which was that's what they brought in. Like, they were the ones who, so the whole thing, like, I find the whole thing to be almost beyond belief. But then this is kind of where we are at. You know, we really are not being very rational,
right?
University system.
No.
And whether we can actually return to that state, this is the question. But we talked before about people like Tony Hall who had to basically found it very difficult to go through the fighting process.
Right.
And then you have people like Denis Rancourt, who spent the last 13 years, battling it out. Well, I am like Denis Rancourt. So look, this is going to be fought out for the next 10 years or 20 years, or however long it takes to shed some light on what's going on here. Yeah. But, the fact that I've been treated in this way is just, it's really very, very disturbing. Everyone should be very disturbed about it. And I'm hoping that, once it becomes publicized enough, people will realize it. But right now, and this is when I was talking to Sinclair McRae in one of our previous disputations, he was kind of mentioning this, that people think that if an institution fires you, like an institution like a university fires you, there must have been something to it. Right. Like, they would not have fired you if you hadn't done something. And it's like, people don't realize the autocratic nature of these institutions now. Like, this is something that has to change. And the only way that it can change is by having the public, like to publicizing what's going on, and to having people look at what's happened, which hopefully is going to, more light is going to be shed on this. And
absolutely. I think just the way the human cognitive system works as well, and the time we have and the media we're exposed to, I think a lot of people just kind of, maybe pick up on your case and hear some of the you've been fired and why, oh, she's racist, and they don't look at all the background You know, they don't take, so I think in laying out your case, at least you're giving people an opportunity to say, hey, there's a whole bunch of other, there's a whole backstory to
Yeah.
where you got to. This isn't just an out of the blue and everybody pump your fists, and you
Yeah.
know, there's a really important backstory.
And race, you know, so the accusations of racism,
Mhm.
which have been going on, you know, I guess starting in, well, I guess it started in 1996, and when Albert Howard and I first wrote
Yeah.
the article, Traditional Knowledge Threatens Environmental Assessment in 1996. There were some accusations then this was racist.
Sure.
That if you criticize what's called traditional knowledge
Yeah.
as being anecdotal and not having the rigor that exists in scientific with scientific methods, that's somehow racist
Right.
against Indigenous peoples. So, and which it's not, like it's just drawing attention to the difference in methods,
Right.
which has got nothing to do with the race of the people involved. All
No.
human beings historically had these anecdotal ways of looking at the world, and Indigenous people can be scientists just like non-Indigenous people can be scientists, but it's the method that's the important thing to look at.
Mhm.
Anyway, that was happening a little bit in 1996, and it's just grown and grown and grown to now it's just complete, like anyone says anything that you disagree with, you call them a racist.
Right.
And there's never any substantiation of it. Like, and it brings to mind, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but I keep on bringing this up for people who really want to see this in action,
Mhm.
which is the case of Evergreen State College in Washington, in the US. There's a great 24-part documentary done by Benjamin Boyce, and the same sort of thing happened there. And Brett Weinstein, who was the professor in question, got pushed out because it was claimed that he was racist.
Right.
And he was actually anti-racist.
Yeah.
He was saying it's not right. There's a big difference between people deciding to stay away from campus because they want to make a point about, you know, how important Black people are to the campus, to having a day where you're told that white people have to stay away, right?
Right.
He was just making that point that those are two very, very different things with very, very different implications. Anyway, because of this, he was called a racist, and the whole campus just, he wouldn't back down either.
Right.
But he didn't have very much support because of his cowardly colleagues.
Right.
But that whole episode that happened at Evergreen, all these students were saying that they were terrified to come to campus because they were afraid that they would be killed.
Oh, grief.
That's what they were saying. Whereas they were the bullies wandering around campus with baseball bats, threatening everyone. So no administrator ever said to these students,
Mhm.
what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like no one said that. They just catered to them and pandered to them. And then you have this monster, this unbelievably terrible situation that Evergreen has not recovered and probably will never recover, because it's just so, you know, it just can't reason about anything, because it's just, you know, it's just the whole I believe you. If you
Yeah.
make a claim and you're part of this intersectional, hierarchy, everyone's got to believe you, and if they don't believe you, they're a racist. And this is not going to work at all in trying to sort through these problems where
Mhm.
there might be legitimate concerns being raised, but it's being bundled in with all this ridiculous thing. And just in terms of my own case, with my satirical efforts about the residential, because I realized you can't reason with this wokeism, and it's still, we haven't got to the bottom of many of the things that I was trying to draw attention to.
Mhm.
I was satirizing these woke historians'
Mhm.
attempts to cancel Canada Day
Right.
with my Twitter activity, and the Students Association came out with a press release denouncing me, saying that I was creating a climate of fear, and showed a tolerance for lethal behavior. Anyway, this was their press release they put out.
Yeah.
And instead of the university going, what are you talking about here? Like, we haven't even shown that there's any murdered and missing children in these cases and so on. What is the evidence? They agreed with them.
Right.
And they said that's one of the reasons why I got fired, was because of these complaints that the Students Association had been putting forward. Can you imagine the emboldening that is going on there? Like, these people who wanted to get me fired, and they did all this, and they acted in a just absolutely terrible way. They've all been rewarded, and patted on the head and told how great they are. And wait till the next person comes forward with some kind of controversial view. So, this is what has happened, and people should be very, very concerned about, these kinds of things happening. Evergreen State being the worst possible scenario. Sure. But that's now like that whole university's been destroyed because no one stood up to this element and said, what are you talking about? You're going to have to provide evidence for your claims. We're not going to just respond to these, highly dubious and almost, like, I'm just going to use the word hysterical. Like, it's just a hysterical kind of thing that's going on where everyone's fueling everyone else in these kinds of scenarios.
Well, even the question, what is going on, where's the evidence, becomes, again, more, another harm, right? You shouldn't be asking me that question. That's just a harm,
You're gaslighting. So that's the term that's used, is you're gaslighting. So, critical analysis and asking for evidence is gaslighting. Right. And actually denying the humanity of the particular people involved. Like, it's just, it's totally unmanageable.
And isn't it, wouldn't it be worse, I would think, from a perspective, the other perspective, saying you aren't engaging me in critical discourse? Doesn't that actually say that you don't think I have the capacity to engage in intellectual discourse? I find that I wouldn't want to be fought off in that manner. So why wear it proudly and go, oh yeah, you're the, you're their
president. And this is actually Sinclair McRae in one of the pieces he did for the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship newsletter. He talks about this in terms of how people are conceptualizing this term respect.
Right.
So some ways in which respect is being defined is that you are just deferential. Right. You're showing, you hold in, you are, like, I don't even know exactly how that, but that's part of it. So you respect Indigenous ways of knowing, which means you don't question Indigenous ways of knowing. That's how you show respect.
I think
And then other views of respect, which is one that he is kind of adopting, is I respect you by treating you as an autonomous individual who has critical faculties just like all other human beings. And for me to condescend to you by pretending that I agree with you when I don't, that is a profoundly disrespectful way to interact with that person. So there's a bit of a, we don't really have the common language and common definitions for many of these things. When people say respect, and they actually mean something else than what some people think that they're talking about.
Yeah, and the only way we're going to find a common language is if we start talking to each other and start working these things out, right? It's just what do you mean?
And I think I was always, hey, I find things are a bit, amped up here, and everyone's a bit, emotional and so on. But the solution to this is not punishment and clamping down. The solution to this is for the administration to provide more opportunities for people to try to figure out what everyone else is arguing. And actually, with the Rational Space Network in our critical thinking series, this is what we were working on, is that we were we were trying to develop kind of structures so that you could have people come together with these contentious positions and then try to diffuse that
Yes.
through what we called critical thinking facilitators. So, and it was, you know, it was just people that would try to pose questions in a way that would be constructive, as opposed to, you know, trying to insult people or,
Yeah.
you know, doing things, you know, when you ask questions where you're not really, it's a loaded question, so it's not really, you know, very helpful in trying to understand things more. And I think we could, you know, this is something that's still possible.
Yes.
If we could just get the administration to say, you know, we're an academic institution.
Right.
We have, these are intellectual matters that we have to sort out through reason, evidence, and logic.
Sounds like a reasonable thing to do.
I know, why not? Like,
here's the space to have it, the ultimate safe space. We can, you know, if we want to use that terminology, is where we can put our disagreements on the table, get clear on what each other means. You get more productive so-called disagreement out of it because you're actually going to be talking about the same kinds of things. And
yes, and the other really good thing as well, I'm not sure if the audience is aware of it, it's what's called street epistemology.
Yes,
it's another really helpful, and Peter Boghossian, who was pushed out of Portland State, another absurd situation, and Anthony Magnabosco is a guy who took on Boghossian's kind of framework, and it's very interesting watching these videos with both Boghossian and Magnabosco.
Yes.
You know, they have a process that they engage in. One of them is that, like, if you don't understand a word, you make sure that you have agreement on what the terms are before you go forward. Another very important thing is you say back to someone what you think they're arguing.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you don't misrepresent what the arguments are. And so those two things, making sure you have the definitions that are common and that it's agreed upon, and two, making sure that you're not misrepresenting arguments before you go on to try to discuss things. Those are two things which would be very helpful in many of these kinds of highly agitated kinds of contexts like that are happening.
You have to have both parties giving uptake to that kind of decorum, right? So we're in a conversation, so it's hard if somebody just wants to be outraged. Well, there's no having a conversation. So it's if I can round us back a moment to students again, I was reading an article about Jordan Peterson, who explaining why he left academia. And one of his worries were that he had the inability to supervise students. He was worried that if he was mentoring somebody and wrote them a letter of recommendation, that would actually affect that student's career. So I wonder if you've thought about those sorts of issues, or if you've experienced any of the barriers to mentorship and whatnot. I mean, part of what I think being an academic and being involved in research is having people who share an interest and research and you know, might not even agree with you as your student, but learn a lot about the topic, and you know, you've got another scholar coming up under your wings, and that's
that was something I never, at Mount Royal, before, I guess I went on sabbatical from 2013 to 2014. And before that, I was quite involved because I was the coordinator of policy studies. So I was involved quite a lot with the students. And then when I went on sabbatical and I came back in 2014, I was no longer the coordinator, and I was I'd had some difficulties with some members of the department in terms of how actually they treated students very unfairly.
Right.
And it resulted in this huge blow up, due process problems. So I became kind of, I just sort of backed away from all of the kind of interdepartmental kinds of things, and decided I was going to devote my attention to national, university-wide matters. So I started working on the Rational Space Network and my national kinds of activities with the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. And as a result of that, I really didn't have very much to do with students from 2014 to 2020, except for my classes, which I really enjoyed. And I actually had some very, very good relationships with students who were worried about the clampdown on open discussion and so on. But we don't have graduate students at Mount Royal.
Right.
So
issue for,
and then my area of expertise, no students really wanted to work with me on Indigenous policy. Plus Indigenous policy now at Mount Royal is all pretty much Indigenous studies, takeover by indigenization and Indigenous studies. So I never really, that wasn't really something like Jordan Peterson, as I understand it, U of T, he was at University of Toronto, which is probably the most significant graduate student university next to McGill.
Right.
So, he'd be working with several graduate students.
Yeah.
But at Mount Royal, we don't have graduate students. So it would have been an honors thesis would have been the thing. And then no one ever approached me about working with me. And we didn't have very many honors students anyway. So it was kind of an unfortunate, I would have liked to have done that. That would have been really good. But it's like, again, like I tried to not teach my material. Like I saw that was a danger zone, like a serious danger zone of, being accused of trying to indoctrinate students to my, views, which were beyond the pale or something like that. So this would be a difficulty, is teaching students about my actual ideas. And I did it, I had a selected topics and policy studies. So I did actually have a segment before 2014 on my views, taught next to the views of Tom Flanagan and Alan Cairns, which were kind of liberal views, and then also as well the post-colonial theory type of perspectives, of looking at these kinds of three different ways of approaching Indigenous policy. I have applied on, there's this university, I'm hoping to teach a course there at Austin. Have you heard about this university in Austin? Peter Boghossian, Niall Ferguson, Ian Hersey-Lee, Dorian Abbott, a bunch of kind of dissident professors.
Okay, I haven't done research on it, but yeah, I've heard.
Anyway, they announced this, I guess it was about a year ago, that they have a forbidden courses program that they're developing.
Yes.
And so I would really like to teach, a forbidden course on uneven combined development, something about cultural evolution and political economy and the Indigenous, non-Indigenous relations. That would be a very good thing to do. But I haven't spent a lot of my time, developing my ideas for the students, because it just seemed too dangerous.
Oh.
I had a great course before I got fired, Canadian political issues, where I did different viewpoints. So and we looked at the arguments and what were the evidence that was presented. So that was a really good course. That would be great to teach again. So and a lot of students there enjoyed it as well. So that's kind of about the extent of my entering into these kinds of controversial kinds of areas.
Right. And I think what I'm discovered there's a lot of students who talk under the radar. I think there are maybe what you would call the woke aspect, or one, you know, very loud and for whatever reason intimidating group. And you've got students who really want to engage in talking about everything, you know, in that
Mhm.
great academic and curious spirit, you know,
Mm.
and but they're afraid to say that out loud.
Mm.
So they're all, even students are running under the radar to a
Yeah.
large degree. And so it's a, you know, it'd be, so some are looking at having a controversial ideas club. So you get, say, the one at UBC, I don't know how it's fared through COVID and whatnot.
Mm.
And then there's a counter group that's the anti-bias and hate league or whatever. So they've got adversaries there, which is fine if you're both operating. You can foil off each other, I suppose. That's a, you know.
Well, the problem is that the anti-hate, whatever it is, their goal is to shut down the free speech group. Like this is, it's kind of one of those, and you probably, as a philosopher, you probably know, you know, this kind of Karl Popper, you know,
Mhm.
that whole kind of contradiction of how do you allow free speech to those who want to shut down free speech? Like you're allowing and actually Sinclair McCrae, just to bring him up again,
Sure.
his position, which I don't agree with. I haven't thought this through in a complete way. But it's kind of an interesting kind of disagreement between Sinclair McCrae and Mark Mercer, whereas Sinclair McCrae says these people who want to shut down debate,
Mhm.
they are incompetence, they're academic incompetence in destroying the foundations of the university.
Mhm.
And so they should be fired because they're sabotaging and destroying all the foundations that made it possible for people to come together and have open discussion at the university.
Right.
And I'm nervous about that position because I'm always thinking, demanding people be fired and doing that, that's just, it seems to me to be going down the wrong road.
Right.
We should be trying to open things up. We should not be demanding punishment. We should be trying to figure out how to kind of diffuse this, this kind of disciplinary kind of strand and this kind of canceling strand that seems to be gaining traction within the university, and demanding people be fired seems to be, you know, kind of feeding into that kind of character of what's happening.
Yeah, I probably lean on not demanding.
Yeah.
But there's a difference perhaps in a specific view and taking action. Does that contravening policies and whatnot are in place to protect academic freedom, and taking those guards seriously, but to actually put forward an argument, well, I guess that's, on my view, another hypothesis that could be tested.
I think we need to figure out how to open things up. I don't know how that's in the current climate of safetyism and all these other terms. Like it seems like it's a fighting and losing battle, but I think we just need to, like, we might be unsuccessful in the end, but all we can do is fight. That's all we can do is fight for the university as a space for intellectual exchanges, which is completely being destroyed as we speak.
And it's going on when you think about the people who are I don't know if you worry about this, who are leaving university with degrees, or your judges and teachers and the education department and whatnot too. So I think perhaps, and I don't know what you think about it, having someone like you, just even if all you can do right now is just stand there, not backing out and keeping these out, that you're going to see, preserve something.
I think so. At least it will shed more light on the situation so that we can understand it more
Yeah.
and figure out new ways to, battle against it. If the legal system hasn't been completely undermined by wokeism and has some kind of, differential treatment based upon these identity categories, if that hasn't happened yet,
Mhm.
my case is very strong, very, very strong. And so there's hope that that will be successful too. And that will be just fantastic if, we can get some kind of objective eyes on it. And
Mhm.
then they will, say to Mount Royal that Mount Royal acted, in a manner that was unjust. And I need to be reinstated at Mount Royal. So that's a big, possibility as well, which will have massive implications if
Yeah.
that's the case.
It's worth
So
keeping.
Pam,
Oh, is it gone?
we have reached the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, wow.
I
It
hate
does
to
go
interrupt
fast.
you, and I realize I could go on forever talking about these matters. I think it's very, very interesting. But our audience, I've heard that, 2-hour segments are
A lot of
very difficult. And I think we have covered a lot of terrain
Yeah.
with respect to all these different issues. So anyway, so I think I'll bring our discussion to a close. I was just, but I should give you an opportunity. Is there anything that you would like to say that you have not been able to, that any kind of burning things in your mind that you would like to say that you have not been able to put forward?
No, it's just I think we've covered a lot of them. I was going to suggest I'd invite you back to our table as an epistemic terrorist, because if there's
Yes,
a,
the epistemic terrorist.
I want a terrorist at my table. There are certain things, and I think a lot of I think there's a lot of good basis for the discussion here as well. Including I was going to talk a little bit about collegiality and that sort of thing, and how
Yeah.
and what it is to be academic colleagues. It's not just, I think we get caught up on niceness and whatnot. And I think there's a lot of cliquiness, like, between people, and they forget about their academic roles. When if I value you as a colleague, I'm not going to worry about whether you're vile or nice or this or that. It's nice if you are, but the point is, do we honor each other as I guess I don't know if that's the right word, but as members of the scholarly community, and put that front and central, and that's the ultimate collegiality.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so
Respect for the intellect.
right, and that's the sort
And you might not, there might be an idea that you dislike,
right.
but you've got to admire someone who
Yeah.
honestly makes the argument and tries to shed light on why it is that they think this particular thing is true, even if you don't think that it's true.
And the principle of charity, that they've got perhaps reasons that they need to work out, and they give them an opportunity to work on that. And that is collegiality. And it would be nice if that was everything else falls into place or out of place, because it's not relevant, it's just so. And that's where I can trust you as another member of the scholarly community, that we may have our differences personally, let's imagine, but when we can come together and work together, we are both privileging this rare and precious scholarly, historically a very rare, precious environment. And how do we, how do we, so anyway.
Well, this has been great, Pam. I really look forward to all your things that you're going to do with your EDI website, and all the light that you're going to shed on this particular area of what's happening in research in the academy. But I wanted to thank you very much once again for joining us today on the Rational Space Disputations.
Thank you very much. Thanks for hosting. Thank you.